Let's pick up with our guest now. Joining us is Diane James, who was for a brief period the leader of UKIP and remains an MEP for the party. Lucy Thomas, who was Deputy Director of the Remain campaign. And Jeoen Dijsselbloem, the former Dutch Finance Minister and outgoing President of the Eurogroup of Eurozone Finance Ministers. It's very nice to have you all here. I'm going to pick up with you, Diane. What was he thinking?
I'm not sure. What was he smoking, I think ought to be the next question.
So it took all of you by surprise?
Yes, it did. I mean, this is the sort of thing that Nigel has got form for. He does come out with these, let's call them rather outrageous statements. In putting it into context, though, and I'm just going to give a personal response, I can understand his frustration with the fact that the Remainers have not given up in terms of trying to overturn the decision. You know, when you hear that Tony Blair launches a fund of £10 million and that there are other organisations endorsed by the likes of Sir Nick Clegg and such that still want to overturn a democratic vote, it really is quite unbelievable. But it's going to be interesting to see where this actually goes.
Would you be up for the fight?
Oh, yes, of course I would. You know, I mean, and I think the most important thing is why I brought this document with me. This whole future of Europe now, this was a document released to the MEPs in, I think it was October of last year. This actually fleshes out the future of the European Union. It's a frightening document in terms of the degree of control.
We've got the perfect person here to talk to us about that. I'll come to you in a second.
When that's in the public domain, it will be interesting to see how people react.
Lucy, would you relish a second chance at this?
Well, I think for me, it was a democratic decision. You know, people have had their say. And I sort of want to ask Nigel Farage, why can't you accept you've won? You know, what is it about this that you don't accept? I think for me, I've known Nigel Farage probably about 10 years, and he just loves a fight. He loves campaigning.
You think this is about publicity?
I do. I think he wants to remain relevant.
Diane's point, though, was that Tony Blair, Nick Clegg still feel that this wasn't won on democratic terms because of the false promises made. So is that enough of a reason to go back to the polls?
I think there are some former Remainers who would like there to be a second referendum and have spoken about that. But going back to what Nick was saying about the polls, you know, public opinion hasn't shifted. There isn't a massive clamour for a second referendum. So I don't think that there is a big push for that. You can think about perhaps once the terms are known, were people to suddenly be up in arms and say, you know, we don't like these terms, we want a second go. But for the moment, the polls simply aren't there.
You were right at the vanguard of that fight, Deputy Director. Would you fight this in a very different way? Do you look back with your head in your hands at the way the Remain campaign went about that?
I think it was a very, very hard campaign to fight, given that people were, when we first started the campaign, it was about 50-50. People, when we spoke to people in focus groups, there was no real concept of what the positives of remaining in the EU were. And so within a 6-month campaign, there was a huge amount of work to do to land those positives. What is it that we get from being in the EU? So I think it's a very, very hard discussion, not least because in a referendum where there are two choices, and it's a very complicated question. People can put all sorts of different things into the pot and are voting to take back control of whatever it is they choose to put into the pot.
Let's pick up with that in a moment. But Jeoen Dijsselbloem, what is Europe thinking about Brexit right now?
What, today, after this cry for a second referendum? So I haven't heard anyone in Brussels argue for a second referendum. I think people in Brussels are waiting for sort of what does the UK government want to have in the end deal? What does it look like? We're asking for clarity on that so we can move forward on that.
So it's up to the UK government to decide what that looks like then?
To have a negotiating position, yes, indeed, that will be very helpful. But no one in Brussels is questioning the mandate that the UK government has coming out of that first referendum. That mandate is quite clear. There's going to be a Brexit. And we're trying to sort out all these very complicated questions on what does it look like, the future relationship. Now, so my argument will be, let's focus on trying to solve these issues and minimize the losses, because there's going to be losses on all sides. Let's focus on that rather than reopening the debate and going back to zero.
It is a delicious irony that the only person questioning the mandate then is UKIP's former leader, Nigel Farage. I mean, does it suggest, as Lucy said, that he just wants to be back in the centre of attention now? Or does he think that it isn't convincing enough people that it's going in the right direction?
I think he's got two perspectives, two objectives, Emily. One, he wants to expose the degree of resistance from the Remainers that still is with them in terms of they are absolutely determined to overturn that decision.
Sorry, I am not at all, and I was the deputy head of the Remain campaign, and I'm saying it's a democratic decision. So there isn't this.
No, but Tony Blair and Nick Clegg are two individuals leading this Remain issue of overturning that democratic decision. And the Labour Party is being very interesting in terms of denying its position that it would actually, everything that it wants currently would mean staying in the European Union.
That's absolutely not right. I mean, just to quote Nigel Farage for a second, he said before the referendum, if it were to be narrow, if it were to be 52 for Remain, 48 to leave, that would be unfinished business, was his quote, and he said he would carry on fighting. So for those people who were former Remainers and who would want a second go, Nigel Farage himself said 52-48 was too narrow and it would be unfinished business.
Okay.
So what has changed?
Well, in which case we've got Tony Blair, Nick Clegg, Nigel Farage all sitting in a particular corner saying, wait a minute, we still believe, given the position we've taken previously, that it's unfinished business. I'm agreeing with you on that point.
But
The
they're
interesting
agreeing
thing
with
is,
him,
of
that's
course,
the point.
that we think we've left Europe in a certain place. Europe has moved on. Europe is more interested in more integration post-Britain, isn't it? I mean, that has been the talk.
Well, you have to realise, and I think the people in the UK have to understand, that the Brexit is no longer on the front pages in Europe and hasn't been for some months.
Is it on any of the pages?
It's on the front pages in the UK every day, page 1, 2 and 3. But if you open up the papers on the continent, you'll find very little on Brexit. We have moved on.
So nobody in Europe is trying to convince Britain to stay now, is that what you're saying?
You'll find individuals, but there is no drive to reopen this debate.
That's not entirely true, is it? Because you've got the German automotive industry in the last few days actually highlighting the dangers that Brexit is going to have for their German manufacturing industry because of the degree, the volume of cars exported.
Look, it's a bad idea.
So you're now agreeing with the German manufacturers' concerns,
I'm highlighting to Jeoen that there is an industry that is, and it was in Bild, for instance, it was in Spiegel, so to say that it's not being covered by the European press is untrue.
Do you think the no-deal concept is a very clever way of bringing Europe right to the table where Theresa May needs to start those negotiations?
My sense is that some strategic politicians in the UK thought that if they said they threatened us with a no deal, that will be helpful for their negotiating position. Now it's completely backfired, because now in Europe people are preparing for the possible outcome of no deal, and the British government is in panic,
Lucy,
saying how can it be that they're preparing a no deal? Look, it's going to be a bad situation. It's a bad decision. The German car industry is right. It's a bad decision.
For Europe,
but
as well as...
It's a political fact for us. And now we need to concentrate on minimising the damage and getting a good outcome.
Isn't the truth, Lucy, that the Europe that we will leave in 2 years' time will be a very different shape and feel to the Europe that we're part of now?
Yes, and that's why Nigel Farage talking about an in-out referendum. It's sort of like, well, in what, in a way? Because what would those terms be? I think it's not right to say we would go into what we had before. I agree entirely. I think it's the decision has been made. Europe is moving on, and I think Brexit will happen.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you too.